let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the dense and honestly often misunderstood requirements of ISO 14001:2026. We're going to do this by mapping out the actual real-world environmental journey of a manufactured product. Now, I know environmental audits used to be treated as this simple check-the-box exercise, right? Just something you did once a year to keep a nice certificate hanging on the lobby wall. But in today's landscape, mastering this standard is absolutely critical to business survival. On paper, it sounds super academic, but in practice, it's all about fundamentally understanding how everything your organization does interacts with the world around it. So today, we are going to put on the hat of a lead auditor to see exactly where companies stumble and how adopting a true lifecycle perspective literally changes everything. Are you artificially hiding your true environmental impact? It's kind of a provocative question, isn't it? But look, as we view this through the lens of a lead auditor, drawing convenient artificial boundaries around your operations is hands down the quickest way to fail. We see it all the time. Organizations try to limit their scope just to make compliance easier. Think of the company that points so proudly to its pristine recycling bins in the break room while quietly ignoring the toxic runoff from its primary outsourced supplier. It happens way more than you'd think. Whether it's deliberate or just an oversight, removing processes that actually contribute massively to environmental risks. ISO 14001 doesn't play that game. It demands complete transparency. Okay, so before we map out our journey, we have to establish the absolute foundational rule of the auditor. You have to distinguish between the aspect, which is the root cause, like, say, burning fuel in a delivery fleet, and the impact, which is the resulting effect, like air pollution. Accurately identifying these aspects is the analytical foundation for literally everything else we're going to discuss. Think of the aspect as the spark and the impact as the fire. Makes sense, right? If you can't identify the spark, you have no chance of preventing the fire. Get this wrong right out of the gate, and your whole environmental management system is just a house of cards waiting to collapse. All right, moving to Section 1, Defining True EMS Boundaries. Let's look at Clause 4.3. This clause governs how wide your safety net needs to be cast. And wow, organizations set some serious traps for themselves here. They often try to limit their scope to clean, highly controlled administrative offices and completely exclude the messy production side of things. But you can't just draw a neat little box around your pristine corporate headquarters with its fancy bamboo flooring and pretend the smoke-belching manufacturing plant 2 towns over doesn't exist. The standard explicitly requires your scope to reflect your actual environmental reality and influence. That means capturing everything you can directly control and, crucially, everything you can reasonably influence. So, what does influence actually look like? Well, if your organization dictates the route planning for an outsourced independent transport fleet, or you control the rigorous specs for how your waste is disposed of, the auditor absolutely expects those to be inside your environmental boundaries. Oh, and here's another huge trap: temporary sites. Auditors love digging into temporary construction sites. Just because the bulldozers are only on site for a month doesn't mean the dust, the noise, and the severe soil disruption aren't on your ledger. If you influence that temporary site, you own the environmental aspect. No exceptions. Which brings us to Section 2, Mapping the Product Lifecycle. Now we're looking at Clause 6.1. This deals with risks and opportunities and pushes us to look far beyond our own 4 walls. Picture a life cycle diagram of a manufactured product with glowing indicators, highlighting environmental aspects at stages like raw material extraction, production emissions, and end-of-life disposal, representing systematic aspect identification. You're not just looking at the factory floor anymore. If your product is wrapped in heavy layers of plastic that inevitably ends up in a landfill, well, that end-of-life disposal indicator should be flashing bright red. You have to trace that entire journey, from the exact moment raw materials are pulled from the earth, straight through your processing, and finally to how the consumer throws it away. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Those glowing indicators we just visualized, they shouldn't just map out normal, highly controlled daily operations. They absolutely must light up for the unexpected stuff too. Potential chemical spills, weird equipment malfunctions, extreme weather events. Your safety net has to be designed to catch the unexpected, because let's face it, Mother Nature does not care about your standard operating procedures. A really frequent and honestly massive failure in audits is when a company perfectly documents their daily emissions, but completely fails to evaluate what happens if a pipe bursts at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Okay, Section 3, Scoring Environmental Significance. The crucial point now is figuring out which of those glowing indicators are the most dangerous. You can't tackle every single impact at once without going bankrupt, so you've got to prioritize. By using a matrix like this, we transform subjective guesses into hard, auditable data to scientifically score which aspects demand immediate operational control. Look at how we map severity against probability and legal exposure. Take wastewater discharge, for example. It might only have a medium probability of a spill, but the legal exposure and severity are so incredibly high that it demands immediate attention and funding. Compare that to recycling office paper. That happens all the time, but carries low severity and almost zero legal exposure. This hard data dictates exactly where your resources need to go. And this brilliantly illustrates why we rely so heavily on that matrix. Without a systematic, evidence-based approach, what happens? Well, human nature kicks in. Department heads will naturally downplay their own risks to avoid extra work, or maybe overinflate them to grab a bigger chunk of the budget. Consistency neutralizes that bias. It ensures the most severe risks actually get the resources they need. If energy consumption scores highly in one facility because of an immense carbon footprint, it has to be scored using those exact same criteria in a sister facility across the country. It stops organizations from sweeping the difficult, expensive problems under the rug. Moving right along to Section 4, setting measurable environmental objectives. Let's talk about Clause 6.2. Once we've scored our most critical glowing indicators, this clause demands that we set targets to actually dim them. This is where high-level strategy turns into grounded, boots-on-the-ground action. Objectives must be actionable and measurable. Take this real-world example, committing to a strict 12% reduction in electricity consumption within 2 years. See what that does? It takes a significant aspect, energy use, and attaches an undeniable hard metric to it. Because let me tell you, vague intentions do not survive an audit. If you tell an auditor you want to use less power, their very next question will be, okay, how much less and by exactly when? Hard numbers with defined deadlines are completely mandatory. An auditor is going to look for quantitative proof. Check out this detailed tracking of current hazardous waste volumes against a strict 15% reduction target over 18 months. If you scientifically identified hazardous waste as a top risk in your matrix earlier, the auditor expects to see a clear, fully resourced objective to reduce it. It proves you're actively managing the risk, not just creating fancy charts to show off in the boardroom. Your data has to show a clear, undeniable journey toward that target. Because here's the reality, vague goals like, we aim to be greener, will instantly trigger a nonconformance. And think about that fourth bullet point. What does communicated to all personnel actually look like in practice? It's definitely not enough for the objective to just live in some dusty binder in the facility manager's office. The worker right there on the factory floor needs to know exactly how their daily operational tasks contribute to that specific 15% waste reduction goal. You need the infrastructure, the technology, and constant monitoring to prove your progress at every single level of the company. And finally, Section 5, adapting to operational change. Let's look at what happens when your business inevitably evolves. Because, as we all know, change is pretty much the only constant. Change management has got to be proactive. Notice how process modification in month 1 must immediately trigger an environmental aspect review in month 2. Why? Because this ensures you're updating your operational controls before the new, potentially hazardous machinery even goes fully online in month 3. You absolutely cannot wait for a toxic spill or a surprise emissions violation to suddenly realize, oh hey, things have changed. The review must precede the risk. Think about it. If you substitute a chemical base or switch your major suppliers, that entire lifecycle map of glowing indicators we talked about completely shifts. Your management system has to dynamically adapt to catch those new impacts. Just imagine an auditor walking the floor, looking at a brand new chemical-heavy automated painting line, only to find an aspect register that hasn't been updated since 2018. Yikes. That is a classic audit failure, and it happens all the time when systems stay static while operations push forward. So, I'll leave you with this question to keep in mind. If your entire supply chain shifted tomorrow, would your environmental safety net actually catch the new risks? Or would you just be auditing a ghost of your former company? I really hope this explainer has given you a powerful new lens for approaching environmental management. Understanding ISO 14001:2026 isn't just about surviving your next audit. It's about proving you are truly in control of your footprint and building a resilient, undeniably sustainable operation. Thanks for joining me.